Hello, hello. Welcome, Shannon.
Hello, hello.
I'm here with Shannon, who is a somatic experiencing practitioner colleague, a dietitian, and a former student in the Peace with Food Transformation Group program. Um, incredibly grateful to have you here. Welcome. And today we're going to speak a little bit about the overlap of the fields of nutrition, dietetics, and somatics, and just your own journey. Because I feel like these conversations can be so theoretical and kind of out there. And
Mhm.
then I meet someone like you who's really living the message of what it's like to bring these complex fields together, and somebody who's actually bringing the words somatic and dietitian together in one place. Which if I had heard that anyone like that existed like 10 years ago, I would have been like, get me on a plane and get me to this person right away, because I need whatever they're doing. So welcome, Shannon. I'm glad you're here. And maybe just tell us a couple of words about yourself before I jump in with all the questions I have for you.
Yeah, so I am in St. Louis, Missouri, and I just completed my somatic practitioner training in October, along with the Peace with Food, Peace with Self group. Um, and I've been a dietitian for over 20 years, and my journey and how I've kind of found myself here has been really a lot of learning what doesn't work. I was, when I was in schooling, it was being taught very traditional things of what we're supposed to do with people and setting them up on a meal plan and weighing every week, regardless if I'm seeing someone with an eating disorder or someone for weight loss. Um, and my skills as a dietitian, I, especially early on, were just that. It felt fairly limited because a lot of my training for working with eating disorders was additional training that I wasn't taught in school. But I was really seeing, especially for clients that I had that were binge eating or that would come see me for weight loss, those modalities weren't working. It was like I became mom or I became the food police. And kind of what would happen is that my clients would kind of stop coming because of what they were holding within them. It just felt like it wasn't working, or they messed up, or that they're pleasing me, or any of that. So um, probably about 10 years ago, I did training to become an intuitive eating dietitian. And I really liked the modality of not dieting, but there's such this focus of listening to your body and seeing like the fact that the majority of my clients have trauma, that they were either in a freeze state or a fight flight state, that they're not going to be able to listen. So one of my colleagues is an SCP and really encouraged me to do the training. And it's just been such a game changer of being able to sit with someone and knowing the foundations of creating safety, because it's such a vulnerable piece when we're working with body and there's a lot of shame, food behaviors, a lot of shame, really just holding a safe place and being able to hear life story and being able to attach it to, well, it makes sense you're using this behavior and it makes sense you're doing this, just this sense of compassion to offer someone. It's just been such a difference rather than this laser focus of just the behaviors with food or just the behaviors with exercise. It's really helping to understand more of the underlings of the why, and helping to support the system and bring the body in the conversation. Where literally this is what I'm working on with people, is the body. And now the body is invited into the conversation, and just that shift alone has just been, it's been huge.
Yeah. I'm imagining that the professional and the personal journey kind of go parallel,
Yes.
as it does for a lot of us who work in the field of helping others. And I'm curious, were there moments when you began your somatic experiencing training, were there moments that you felt, oh wow, this is what was missing, or this is a light bulb that's really helping me now fill this gap that as a dietitian or intuitive eating practitioner I didn't have?
Yeah, I mean, it was more of understanding what would show up a lot in my office or what was reported, um, of just how people would be, and it was like, I would that's something that, like, now I would make space for, like, I might be observing, like, "Oh, this person's bouncing their knee the whole time they're talking about something,
Mm.
and they're anxious sharing it with me," and now I could maybe bring more attention to, "Hey, let's notice what's going on with your leg, like, let's notice the anxiety," and bringing that in,
Yeah.
where before I would just be like, "Oh, yeah, she's nervous, I'm ignoring it," right? Like, it's
Mm.
so
Mm.
some of, especially when we look at somatic and going through SIBAM, of just being able to look at all of those channels that the body is talking about, rather than the standard is a lot of thought. It's a lot of CBT. It's a lot of like, let's just work with what your thoughts are. And we can't think it away. Like, I know for me in my own journey of going through a lot of talk therapy and then shifting to somatic work, it was like I could talk about issues to literally I was blue in the face and I was like, still not happening, still not changing, still stuck. And bringing in the somatic work and then talking with the body, it's like it's been life changing because it's been these shifts. And I felt like with the training, it was understanding me more. Like, I've always been someone where I'm always learning and I'm, going through a lot with myself because I feel like that just makes me a better practitioner. And I'm able to see, in some cases, to be like, I get it. I get where you are. I've been there. I know what that's like. So that part has felt really huge, that I have shifted so much as a person, but it's allowed me to shift hugely as a practitioner and just to soften and to be
Mm.
more in the room and not like before. I feel like I'm wearing my practitioner hat and this is where I stand. Like, now I feel like I don't, not that I don't have the hat on, but it's like, it's so different. It's like I'm more in it and more with someone than I feel like I was before.
Mm. That's beautiful. And where my energy is going as I'm listening to you is what it's like. You mentioned SciBAM, and for those listening who have not been through my group training or SC, it's this idea that constantly we're perceiving through different channels of perception. And we have sensation, we have imagery, we have behavior slash movement, and then emotion, affect, and then meaning. And what it's like to bring all these channels in the room, as opposed to let's look at a meal log, or let's weigh you, or let's measure you, especially if you're going for weight restoration, where there's all this stress and pressure, usually from the family system of how, especially if it's a young person, how they're doing week to week as they see you. What it's like to compartmentalize, because so often in the way we try to help, we tease things apart to where we fragment them so much that it's almost like the body was not in the room.
Mhm.
And what it's like to bring the body in the room. And I'm imagining that as you do that, the person who's sitting on the other side, they get to become more whole, and they get to see themselves through your eyes, perceive themselves through your way of being and holding the field, that they see that there's more to it than what they're eating or how much they weigh, if you're doing that every week. It's like, wait a minute, there is a human being attached to the behaviors, as opposed to I am these behaviors. So the disidentification that comes is just profound, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, and it's such a different way they get to be with body, especially when body's been the point of criticism, whether from others or from self or both. I feel like it's, the gentle invitation of like, let's just notice. And it's them getting to experience like, oh, my body is talking to me, or it is, I am imagining this, or I am feeling this, or I do want to move in this way, and what it's like just to listen, like that honoring and supporting body becomes such a different way than they get to interact with body. It helps to change some of that relationship.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm so glad that you are bringing these two fields together. And you mentioned a colleague who introduced you to somatic experiencing. So there's more and more of that happening. And I intersect with a lot of therapists and dietitians as well who are learning that, wow, this is the way the field is going. It's not just, these random few of us who have put these things together. This is where the field is going because this is where the organic intelligence of the system is taking the field.
100.
And over and over and over again, we see how things don't work well unless we include all the parts that were not included. Speaking about parts that were not included, I would love to ask you, where do you see the role of trauma, whether shock trauma or developmental relational trauma, um, in the challenges that people see, whether it's on one end with self-care and just supporting health day to day, or on the other extreme, something like an eating disorder that is really dangerous and threatening to our well-being.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of people when they think of trauma that like they think like it's a big shock trauma. And sometimes that's the case for a lot of people, but it's realizing how much is there like developmentally and really looking at when a lot of needs weren't met, how we can go into these states of survival where we resist receiving self-care or doing the things like that's been a big part of my work just personally is leaning into receiving, allowing myself to receive, how important that part is. I feel like that's part of what I feel like has been foundational. And that was what was foundational for sure with your group was there's such this emphasis on resourcing and receiving and that to be such a form of nourishment that we need that I think a lot of people don't like they don't regard that like they don't look at it in that way and just how healing that is. It's
Mm.
huge. Like it's I think that I do think that, somatic is becoming more buzzy. I feel like there's more people who are understanding some of that. I think sometimes it's the catch-all, a little bit, but once you're understanding like the way the body is showing up of like noticing like, oh yeah, I don't want to do that. Understanding like, oh, well, maybe there's some resistance that's there into receiving what you didn't get.
Yeah.
Even to that extreme of the eating disorders, like I think that it's still this foundational piece of um needs that weren't met. And then there's survival mechanisms that have been adapted and how are we gently unfolding. And it's doing that work is such a beautiful invitation of relationship with self. How am I able to give myself what I didn't get? And I'm no longer alone because I have me helping my little parts, like I think those parts become really important in just what I'm able to give self that I didn't get when I was young.
Yeah. And you can see, you spoke about this earlier, how for somebody who's had trauma, and if we use the broader definition of trauma as the way that you adapted to the overwhelm where you didn't have sufficient resource to digest what happened to you, about that for a long definition,
Yeah.
that then learning how to resource the body and integrate the unintegrated resource in order to digest the trauma imprints, that in itself is what's needed in order for us to be able to restore a relationship with the feedback loops that underlie eating and what it takes to have a healthy eating cycle.
Yeah.
And you
Oh,
brought intuitive eating earlier, and I just really wanted to ping you there. Like, who is that for? Who is that not for? And maybe you, as an intuitive eating practitioner, actually saying this first and then intuitive eating, like how do you see if somebody was really interested in learning how to listen to their body, following their intuition, or eating seasonally, whatever it is that people want to do, or like their ancestors, um, where do you see the role of organizing the biology if that's the interest of the person?
well, I think there's a part of looking at like when someone's coming in to want to work on intuitive eating, I mean, I'm definitely looking at how how are they connected to body? Like, how do they know? How do you know when you're hungry? How do you know when you're full? How do you know what felt good when you were eating versus more, I'm following this, right?
Mm.
Like there's this piece of there's just so much information out there and so many plans and ways of eating and doing things that, following the congruency of the body, I feel like is that part is an important piece. But I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but like I think that there's an element of, I like it, like what's under the why of like wanting to maybe be to, let's say I want to eat seasonally. Why do you want to do that? Like why is that part so important? What do you notice with body? Does that feel like it's like a rule
Mhm.
versus what if I want to eat something that's more wintry in the summer? Like it's then is this bad? Like it's, I think some of the stuff with diet, with the way the diet culture is, it's really sneaky and it shows up to where it can be right or wrong or good or bad. And that's some of when when someone's wanting to work on no rules, right? Like I feel like one of the great things with your class too is like this issue of boundaries, right? Like I want to have these more boundaries because I don't have boundaries with self, right? Like I think that that's really like that's like a foundation of a lot of what I end up working on because it's a huge piece. So I feel like some of that creates like, is that just another way to be more hyper boundaried or to have no boundaries, right? Like when in intuitive eating, there has to be boundaries. We can't just be a free for all. Most people are coming to see me after they've tried intuitive eating for the last 6 months or year. They've gained 30 pounds. And so now they want to come see me. Like that tends to be when I get people in the process. And
Yeah, yeah. Same with me. Same with me. People will come 80, 100 pounds into it, especially during COVID,
yes, yeah.
when we had all this social distress and lack of social connection and hyper arousal in the system, and somehow people were trying to eat intuitively during that time. Not a good time.
Oh,
And and then there's this confusion, and I'm curious how you answer this question. Like, if I am eating intuitively, then why am I gaining weight? And that's where people end up in my program when they're like, well, clearly I can't trust my body because what I'm hearing it say to me ends up like this. And I'm just curious, if we don't make weight bad, if we don't make weight bad, we just keep it very neutral. Like, how come that's the outcome that
mhm.
people have? And not everybody has that outcome, but many people who end up
Yeah.
in my
Well,
program have that outcome.
they're coming off of so much restriction.
Hmm.
Right, so like that again, to go back to the boundary of like where it's so hyper boundary to then have the permission of no boundary, um, is then the playing out of what then their food relationship is. Like, I'm gonna eat everything I wasn't allowed to,
Right,
right? And
right.
I think there's a part too where some people don't realize that pattern that they're eating isn't supporting their blood sugar, isn't supporting their hormone levels. Like there is the reality of that. Like we can't ignore there is a basic science of our body. Um, I think that's some of what, if like if someone's eating something and they're not really regarding that, and then it's like, okay, I'm hungry 2 hours later and I'm gonna eat again, and then I'm hungry 2 hours later and I'm gonna eat again. Intuitively, we would say, then you need to eat. But I would come in and look at like, well, let's look at what you're having. Are you eating things that are actually supporting your blood sugar that would help you stay fuller longer? And just noticing, what is that even like? Me saying that, is there like, oh, I don't want to do that. Like I think that part is there's so much relational issues with food, and that depends on how someone was brought up with food, what diets they were put on, what diets they put themselves on, that there is trauma from dieting. And it can feel like, well, if I'm doing that, I feel like I'm on a diet. And it's just like noticing, and how do we kind of help to uncouple what may have been things that you did, that how can we help you to feel more supportive to your body, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a reason if it's a free for all and I'm not caring and I'm wanting to repair a relationship with food. A lot of times people are doing that in a state of flight. They're not at all connected to their body. They're, it's more mindless. I'm eating in front of the television. It's quick, it's fast. So part of what I really encourage, it's like almost like I kind of like market is like, it's like couples counseling with food. Like, hey,
I love that.
level, and I need to spend time with you. So just gonna sit with you. I'm gonna notice what it feels like to be around you. I'm gonna notice what it feels like before I engage with you. Like I'm really slowing things down rather than the efforts. I'm just gonna have it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I love what you're sharing because, in some way, if we take intuitive eating, that's just feedback loops that the body set up on.
Yep,
We can have intuitive sleeping, we can
yep,
have intuitive going to the restroom,
yep,
intuitive showering, intuitive toothbrushing, intuitive caring for yourself when you have the flu,
yep,
because
yep.
these are all the interoceptive feedback loops that the body set up on. And I believe, I don't think it's a Garden of Eden kind of thing. I don't think it's a fantasy that that is possible,
Mhm,
because we come from nature, and in nature it's possible.
mhm.
And in nature, you know, wolves don't go to the dentist to have their teeth cleaned like your I'm trying to remember your dog's name.
Oh, Bailey.
Bailey has to go to the dentist every
Yeah.
6 months and get her teeth cleaned. I just got my teeth cleaned yesterday, right? Just like Bailey. You don't have to do that in nature because things are set up differently. However, we, through the agricultural revolution and then the industrial and the technological and whatever this revolution that we're in right now, I don't know what we're in right now, the next phase of humanity, we are more and more becoming removed from nature, but we have the memories and the cellular expectations of natural workings. And so I don't think it's a fantasy when people really go, and the language they'll use with me is, I just want to be normal.
Yes.
And I would say those words through tears. I would just weep and hiccup as I was telling Lois Laney at the time, I just want to be normal.
Yeah.
And that what I believe we refer to as normal is I feel my hunger, I eat enough to be done, and then I don't think about it. Like what we call the normative eating cycle, right? It's just, I'm just going to eat. However, our culture is very complex in what's available. And also, intuitive eating, when it was brought forward, or any kind of listening to the body idea, is brought forward in a culture that's already discombobulated our listening space.
Mhm.
And so, in a way, it's not like, oh, here's intuitive eating or anything else that's intuitive, and I'm just going to follow that as if it hasn't arisen within the matrix of this whole other
Yes.
wider culture. And so I believe when people come to you or come to me with this, like, well, this isn't working, it's not because it doesn't work, but because the initial conditions were not set up for it to be working. And so
Yeah.
when there's trauma, when it's shock trauma or developmental trauma, and you're hearing from the same interoceptive system these crossed wires of messages, or, oh, it feels like a diet if I need to make sure that I eat enough protein, that feels like a diet. That's because you've dieted. It wouldn't feel like a diet if you didn't in your body walk around with file cabinets of having dieted.
100%.
Like, to me, every time I put cabbage in a soup, I'm like, oh, this feels like a diet, because I was on the cabbage soup diet so many times as a teenager. And it's like cutting the cabbage to make like an Asian inspired soup.
Yeah.
I'm like, I feel like I'm on a diet. Like that's never going away from my associative network because of how much cabbage I've eaten in soups trying to lose weight. And the greatest thing about the cabbage soup diet, I don't know if that was a big thing in the States.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it was like that, but in Bulgaria, you had to, at the end, when you were done cooking it, you had to let it simmer so it's not like too hot. And then you put liquid vitamin C in it.
Get the vitamins in.
And to this day, if I see liquid vitamin C, I'm like, oh, not interested. So it's really impossible to remove what we've done from ourselves. It would be like cutting off an arm or a leg. It's a part of our wholeness. But how we hold it,
Yes.
like I still eat the cabbage. I just get the memories and I just kind of laugh at it because it's kind of integrated. I don't feel traumatized by what I've done anymore. I don't feel guilty for what I've done to myself. I had to move through that, and it's been a journey. But I believe that if things don't work intuitively, there's good reason for it. And it's never that you're broken or something's wrong with your body or you can't trust your body. It's that it's showing up in the context of what you've already lived through.
100%. Well, and I think that's what so many people, I think that's what draws so many people to intuitive. They don't want to do it anymore. They're aware, they sense this is not okay for me to keep dieting anymore. I
Right.
don't want to keep doing it. Right. So even thinking about like just the wisdom of the body being like, nope. But there's it's so much harder because I think most people are used to, I go on the diet, this is what I do, and these are the results. It's so quick fixy, right? And then we know that the system doesn't work with that. We know the system, it's as you kind of always say, it's like watching grass grow. It's slow. So that part, I think a lot of people have a hard time with when we're looking at the shifting and the healing. We're looking at these other areas of nourishment our body, our system, our self needs, and how then that has such a foundational relationship with the food.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. So I'm curious. There's so many things I want to ask you. When you mentioned going through the Peace with Food transformation group, and your group was just magical. I look forward to at some point interviewing your whole group together so people can experience you as a field. Um, I'm wondering, what was that like for you? And you coming through um, biologically reorganizing curriculum, you coming with everything being this very well-educated dietitian, intuitive eating practitioner, somatic experiencing practitioner. What was it like for you to go through it? I'm imagining like wearing two hats or riding two horses at the same time.
Well, I mean, I know I've shared with you, but like I read like the introduction to your book and was like, I need to work with her at some capacity because I felt like as a dietitian and then doing the SE work, it was like, how do I bridge this to food? And like you had already figured it out. So like to me, which there was a part of like, I'm gonna figure it out and knowing like, oh, I don't have to do that. Like, just done it.
Yeah.
Felt, especially coming on with a group as a practitioner, I had like, is it gonna feel like I'm sitting with a bunch of my clients? Like, how is this gonna be? Like, it felt really like kind of hard at first. And the first couple of groups, I had my practitioner hat on and I would take notes. And as I was doing that, I was like, I'm not really getting what I need to be getting out of this group if I have this hat on.
Mm.
By the third week, I was like, you can't wear the hat when you're in the group. So that was a huge shift for me, just for me to show up as Shannon participant, not Shannon as a dietitian and somatic practitioner, felt really important for me to really feel the group because wearing the hat as dietitian, it was a block. I wasn't able to receive, I think, what I needed to. So once I did that, I felt like that felt like such a game changer for me. And I felt like I never had to put my dietitian hat on. Like I felt like I got to stay as participant and noticing how whatever we learned that week would always touch these little tender parts of me because everything's so digestible. Like in the somatic training, it's such like this 4 days of intense training or 6 days of intense training, and you have to override because you're okay. We're on the next day, the next trauma, we're going to work, work, work. The digestibility, and that's like the word I would for sure use. It's so digestible. It's like these parts of where, oh, I've learned this. I know what's going on. But like now I'm actually like feeling it and
Mm.
letting myself receive it. And that part felt like every week it was like, oh, I'm getting this on such a different level that I would inevitably have 5 clients walk through my door that were, I'm like, what? I haven't learned about this week. Like it was always so fun to kind of be able to identify and really get it. And again, that's my relatability of where, oh yeah, I get where you're coming from and I can feel this in my body. What do you feel in your body? Like that felt so huge of where it was helping me, but then I could turn it to practitioners. So what I started to do was at some point in that week, I would listen to the recording with my practitioner hat on. I would take the notes, I would do the things.
Mm.
So I was receiving it again and really getting it through the lens as SEP dietitian rather than Shannon participant. Like, and to separate those two felt really helpful because one, I'm like getting the information again, but I was letting myself receive it in my own healing, which is just, I think that makes it has helped my system to be so much more regulated, but also has helped me to be a more regulated practitioner.
Yeah. That sounds like a beautiful marriage of the two. I'm curious, and it's been a while since you graduated,
Yeah.
and I'm sure I asked you that question privately, but for other people who are listening and who are curious, I'm wondering, would you be willing to share a couple of shifts that you experienced personally as a human being walking on the planet, as you completed the group experience?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest shifts was the slowing down. Like I always kind of say, like my system just goes to, I live on rocket fuel. Like I have 4 kids, a full private practice. My life is very busy and I constantly felt in this sense of urgency. And that
Mm.
time was like this. There's not enough time.
Mm.
I feel like the somatic tools of the peripheral, that I'm not this, that I'm really aware of like what's out here. How can I just sit and feel my feet, my seat, my back, and just notice what it's like to drop in my body? I would tend to be like, well, I don't have time to do that, or there's not enough time to do this or that. Like I would make it felt like that. Like in my body was like, "Eh." But if I can just invite this ease of like, oh, I can feel into my body as I'm sitting with this client. And
Yeah.
I can notice when I'm out in the morning, even if I'm walking to my car, to look up and notice the sky and the trees and the grass and just take it. And that literally takes like the 10 seconds it's taking me to walk to my car, noticing just the softening of my system
Mm.
felt huge. And that I did not learn in my somatic training. It was not there. This is some of where the the exercises, the tools, the practices just felt they're such like in real time, so useful that that's where I just felt like I gained so much in that regard that felt foundational. My other part was just like noticing how hard it is for me to receive.
Yes.
Um, that was huge, and that's still my work in progress, but
Mhm.
like, I don't think I ever really was fully aware of how hard that really was for me. Um, and just looking at how that would show up if like a client gave me a compliment.
Mhm.
My ego could be like, yes, I know I'm good, but like really like softening to self of just like, can you let yourself receive? Like you've made a difference. Or relationship with my husband or friends. Like it's really looking at certain relationships with friendships of what I was settling for and not getting, and how much that was a part of my pattern just within my in my childhood, and really being able to just receive what was there of noticing I was kind of like this.
Mm.
So that felt huge. Like I felt like the for being in somatic training for like close to 3, 4 years. And then the 7 months of the group was like, it just kind of rocket fueled uh, my healing. Like it just was, and again, I think that it's like every week, these little nuggets, and I can hold it and integrate it, digest it, process it, like
Mm.
and just the congruency of the group, of just the patterning and the build of helping the system to be more ready to the material that was in the end. Um, it was just beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And it's bringing memories back to me of what it was like to sit with you and watch you learn how to receive and tracking nourishment barriers and all these really cool things that we got to do together. There's also something really special about coming with a small group of people
Yes.
over and over and over again that the system just learns what we can only call secure attachment. It learns the embodied experience of secure attachment, which is really hard to learn in larger spaces because larger spaces have so many nervous systems in them. And, all of us kind of gravitate towards a couple of maybe TAs or a couple of colleagues, and we form our little pods in our cohorts as we go through somatic training. But it's how special it is to have that over and over again, knowing that you'll be met with kind eyes, knowing that I'm going to show up and I do my best to show up in my, most open-hearted way. So I'm a holder of that invitation that we stay in safe and social and the ventral space. If something rises up, that we can meet it, it'll digest in the field. And you learn to trust that you're going to be okay around other people, which is so often at the base of eating disorders, that being with other people is unsettling.
Yeah, I feel like the there's so much healing in group that you just don't get in individual because you're so met, right? Like I think that the in our group in particular, we all struggled with receiving, and we could meet each other and understand each other, even as someone else is sharing parts of self. Or like, oh yeah, I feel so seen right here, and being able to share what comes up, it's so healing because you're met with such compassion and understanding. um and it does create this safety of even just, oh, I'm noticing this comes up, and this is like this experience of group this was my second time in an experience as a participant in a group, and I feel like everyone's on board with, we all want to heal, we want our systems to be in a different place, or I'm really curious about how this works. That alone creates this, like, we're here with this common interest and like, so, and just the shares of how seen and heard, it helps to create more of a secure attachment. And our group still meets every week. We're a pod that we're just like committed to wanting to be together and for one another. And it's like, in a lot of ways, it's like, here's a space that I can say these things and know I'll be understood and know I'll be met. And that part really does, it's so foundational. It's so healing.
It is so beautiful because we see, like, you've made this gesture a little earlier of, I was like this with my friends. It's like nourishment is available, but we're not able to take it in. And how do we create the pathways and the bridges for that to happen with people where the stakes are not as high? Like in our circles of intimacy, if we're doing this with a spouse or children or family of origin or your closest friend of 20 years, there's so much history there, and so much projection, just even in the healthiest way that projection happens. But to do that with brand new nervous systems and really start to open the drawbridge to the castle, lower the drawbridge to the castle where the stakes are not as high. It really allows the dangling wires of secure attachment that haven't attached to start to attach.
Mm.
And it's just a beautiful thing to witness. And um, that's not to say it's like a Garden of Eden kind of situation where we have this fantasy of like everything's always wonderful and unicorns and rainbows. but that's human life. Human life can also be messy and can be complex, and you can show up tired, or you can show up angry, or you can show up like, I don't really want to be here, and that'll be met too.
Yeah.
And that's the relational generosity that you um, all have for each other. You all have for each other. It's really beautiful.
I feel like too, just as a practitioner doing group, like it also allows you to see in a more intimate way these processes. Like I think that that part was also really helpful of someone sharing their experience, and I might be able to be like, oh, I have a client who does that.
Mm.
And now I'm relating in a way that I'm not going to necessarily relate with my client, but like it's a different window in. And like that part felt really helpful. Um, just as far as it coming from someone else who may share similar background or similar behaviors, or I think that that part also felt like a really helpful piece. And again, that's when I'm putting I'm going to take my notes and re-listen, but like noticing,
Mhm.
um, I think that some practitioners may feel like there's so much vulnerability with going in group and participating in group, but like I feel like I consider myself a healer, but I continue to work on my healing to be a healer, right? And I think that when I'm surrounding myself with people who are also healing and healers in their own way, that it can't not impact you, and it helps you just to become a better person to help people.
Mm, I love that. I love that so much. And you're reminding me of just how many practitioners come through my groups. In the beginning, when I wrote my book and I started the groups, I was hell-bent that the language I'm using and who I'm reaching out for is people who've never heard about the nervous system. I'm going to the people who what we call the unaware or newly aware in stages of awareness, the lowest stage of awareness. Very little technical language, a very small book, because people are coming having read like Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate and these really like thick big books, and they were like, I've read it and it's added insight to injury because I just don't know what to do with what I've read now. And you can't just like call Gabor and be like, hey, can I work with you? And of course, compassionate inquiry has just a huge network of practitioners. But I was like, I want to be somebody who brings a small book to the world where people who don't know get an idea, and then those of them who are ready to make the shifts and to make those steps forward, because this work is not for everybody, which is
No.
why we have a very small school. We serve a very small number of people each year. Those people who are ready, let them come.
Yep.
And then when therapists started writing me and calling me and asking me if they can come and do my group program, I was like, what is happening? I was completely unprepared that this was actually bridging two worlds for practitioners as well, whether they're dietitians or psychotherapists or social workers or anybody who's working in the fields of addiction. And I have so enjoyed working with the people wearing two hats like you. It's been so cool to see, oh wow, all this somatic competence that you're gaining is helping you become a better practitioner, and then that's how the work gets spread in the world through all of you wonderful
Yep.
humans. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really.
Yeah. I know anyone, and that, especially in my somatic training, that I know work with eating disorders. I'm like, you need to take Galina's group. Like, like part of what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a couple of dietitians in a group that's graduating in a couple of months, and I have these dreams about gathering you all together and creating something. So maybe we can talk about that. I'm wondering, as we're kind of closing, if there's anything else that you want to share, whether it's about um, maybe something that excites you in that intersection of dietetics and somatics, or something that you're working on right now. Is there something else you want to share with us?
Yeah, I feel like the intersection for me, especially in my practice, has been, I mean, to me, it's just been such a game changer. Like it's changed who I am as I show up in my office, um, in a way that feels like I just I have a different understanding of someone that I didn't have before. And that part just feels like I have this whole other skill set to work with, that I just didn't have before. And that part feels like I'll have clients that will want to come see me just for somatic work. And I have like a whole bin of like, okay, let's see what's coming up. And I have this to work with, and we can work on this. And being able to relate that part to how they might show up with food. I've had therapists that have said to me, like, they love working with me because of what I'm bringing up in session somatically, then they can go and process therapeutically. Like, that's been a huge compliment, because I've also had therapists that are like, I don't like, like working with you because they don't understand the somatic piece. Um, so I think some of that's just been this shift in how I show up. And also for me personally in my practice, like my work has been a lot of who I am and how I show up. And just this, like this is my first year of not doing a training. Like I feel like I've always been like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? And so just to sit in, I'm going to be a somatic dietitian and just sit in this, and I'm not going to do any extra training. I'm not going to seek any more, just to sit in it. There is that, as we were kind of talking, this unease that's like, okay, but like there's a part where it feels really good. Like, let's just see this, realizing like that's my pattern of flight of like more, 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 more. So just to sit and receive and be has felt like noticing times of where it's like, is this okay? Is this okay? And then this, like, it's okay. Just tolerate we have the capacity to hold this.
Yeah. Yeah. And just how much we as practitioners can reinforce the young beliefs that we're not enough by doing more and more and more trainings. Like, if I'm always doing the next training and the next one and the next one, it's very hard to feel complete and satisfied and nourished internally by what you already do.
For sure.
You
Yeah, it's funny.
know?
I was on a podcast a couple months ago, and they had like gone through some of my stuff. They're like, we see who created these 5 foundations for healing your relationship with food. And I was like, oh, I did? Like I forgot that I did it. And I was like, really good. Did this. And like I'm like going through my articles. I was like, okay, you need to sit and look at what you've done, because it is this perpetual. I've just been this, the next, the next, the next. So
Yeah.
it's actually been really good to, I mean, I'm a couple months into it. So, but just this piece of just like, okay, we're taking the year off on like, and we'll just see what happens even after the year. It feels good just to kind of tread. And I also have 4 kids. So life is abundant. So it's the juggle of noticing 4 little systems and myself and the systems that walk into my office of, I have a lot of capacity, but it is, how am I just learning just to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And to inhabit the rich life that you've created. It's
Yes.
like I've created this rich life where I have this big, beautiful family and this beautiful private practice. And am I inhabiting it fully?
Mm.
Or am I, out there in the world picking more and more and more and more? So let's just really move in here. You know how sometimes people will move into a new house and they're still in boxes.
Yeah.
I feel like some of our learning is like still in boxes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's like, can I unpack and just find shelves for this and just really, really settle? Like, people will come to me, when are you going to do a practitioner training? I'm like, I don't know, maybe never. I know how many we're helping, 36 people a year currently. If we can help 42 next year, that'll be great. Me and the team of 4. But we have a very small school because we work very deeply. So there's so much to unpack. I just taught a year on attachment in the graduate program. It's like there's so much to unpack. Why would we want to bring more and more and more and more instead of just really doing what we do very well?
Yes.
And so I wish that for you too, as I've been unpacking the same journey of more and more and more. Because the reality is, if you're new at something, you have to work really hard to become competent at it.
Very true.
And
Yep.
I worked 35, 37 clients a week for years to become competent at what I do. And you're not going to become competent working 3 hours a day. You're
No.
just not.
Mhm.
But at some point, it's like, where is this balance of enough? And then I just get to really go deep in my work. And I love that for you. I'm so excited because that rocket fuel of learning, that's not nourishing.
No,
That's not nourishing.
I wouldn't change the fact that I did it. Like, and I feel like
Yes. Yes.
I'm grateful for that part of me that's like, no, we need to do more. But I'm also really grateful for the part that's like, let's camp out. We're good right now. And
Yeah.
just that part and noticing, like I think that I rooted, I don't know, like I just felt like that was just me of like, oh, I'm just a learner. I need to do this and this and this. And so just the sitting, there's so much data that I'm learning and just the sitting. There's so much interesting information that's coming through.
So good. I love it. My last question to you is a kind of an inspirational guide, calling you into the role of an inspirational guide of if somebody's listening to us who's been struggling for a long time, who feels like no matter what I do, things don't work for me. Yeah, all that sounds really good, but here's another thing that I'm going to do, and how do I know that it's going to help? Is there any words of wisdom and guidance that you have for somebody who's considering maybe moving in the direction of somatic healing for their eating suffering, or intuitive eating, like any of the things that you understand well? Do you have any guidance for somebody who might be considering working in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like from actually having several people who are in that exact position, the somatic approach is so different because it's allowing you to see the things that happened early on in life as well as current, but really these early on experiences, how they impact you in the today. And I feel like in traditional models, those are just kind of maybe not brushed over, but like really understanding the impact that that's had on your body.
Mm.
If you're able to be patient, because it is a slower process, because it is working at the pace of the body, it brings so much richness that you don't necessarily get in the past models because they haven't worked for you. Like they haven't worked because likely you haven't brought the body into the conversation. And that's the missing link is once we bring body in and can start talking to body and understanding what body has to say, it's an entirely different conversation. And
Mm.
that's where the wisdom is. That's where the healing is. And it's such a gift.
That's wonderful to hear, and I can feel it as you say it. Just kind of drops in. If people saw you and they're like, this is my person, I really want to work with her. I know you have a full private practice. I'm going to share your website, and maybe you can just say it out loud for people right now. Maybe people in St. Louis or people who want to work with you online. I'll share it with your permission so that people can find you.
Yeah. Yeah. My website's awakened-body.com.
Oh, it's so beautiful, and awakened it is. And I really hope that the right person who sees you, who sees what you've experienced in our program, makes the step in the direction that is best for them. And I want to repeat what you said, is that it's not a quick fix to include the body in the conversation, but it is a permanent solution, because the body is not the problem. The body is the solution to all of this. And it's a hard direction to move towards, especially if you've lived most of life in freeze or dissociative strategies. If you're using food or dieting to escape from your life, that why would you turn towards the place you're running away from? And yet that's the call home. And each of these behaviors is like a postcard from home. It's like, let's just come back, come back, come back. Took me a lot of time. I'm finding my students, it takes them a shorter time since there's more of a map of what we're doing. I really was walking in the dark with lots of frustration. But I believe that it's possible, and I see that it's possible. And I really want to encourage people who feel the stuckness or a lack of trust that that's another signal, not a problem, but another signal that the body needs to be included.
100%.
Thank you so much for the conversation, for just who you are being in the world, and for all the ways that we have all these creative ideas to do things together in the future. Very grateful for that.
Thank you, Galina. It's an honor.
Thank you for our conversation, Shannon.
Thank you.